Happy Friday, everyone. I just sat down to have a cup of coffee, and I've been putting together several pages of information for the last few days that I want to start today. This is probably going to be just part one, but I want to bring you all this information because, it's been less than a year ago that we had Hurricane Helene, and I'm right on the edge. I live right on the edge of the area that got hit hard in East Tennessee with Hurricane Helene. Now, it did not affect me or my property, but our church is in the next town over, and although it wasn't directly affected as far as the building was concerned, many of the people in our congregation were affected because they live in that town, and they some of them lived near the rivers. And I know during that time they had 2 bridges that were shut down, and my brother-in-law and his family were between the 2 bridges, so they had to make do with what they had. And so I had firsthand knowledge of how it affected, what was affected, the things that would have made things easier had everybody had these things on hand. And so I want to start today giving you all some lists of things. Now, everybody's not going to need everything on these lists, but there's going to be a lot of things on these lists that everybody will need. And, Hurricane Helene, they say, was once in a 100-year event. But there are those of you who live in hurricane zones, who live in areas of the country where you get snowstorms. Many different disaster possibilities have happened across this country, and it seems like in the last 2 or 3 years that they are increasing in the number of these disasters that are happening. That whole situation down in Texas, it broke my heart to think about all those young girls in a camp that was near water, and I don't know if that could have been prevented, if they had had advance notice. But situations there's some things during Helene, no matter if they'd had everything on these lists, it would not have made a difference. But for the mass majority of the people who got impacted by Helene, there will be things on this list that would have made life so much easier for them. And so I want to give you all this information. You do with it according to what you need and according to your location, according to your family. So, but when Helene happened, the very first thing that I noticed was the city water was no longer safe to drink, no longer safe to take a bath in, no longer safe to wash their clothes in. The municipal water system was useless. And so it took, a couple of days, a day or two at least, for pallets of water to start coming in so that people could get pallets of water to take home. But the problem with that is, just like with my brother-in-law, he was between 2 bridges where he could not get out to even go get water. Fortunately, I think they had some bottled water on hand, enough to last a couple of days, and so they were not immediately impacted in a bad way. But there were probably some people that lived around him who did not have water. That was just a bad situation. You can only live without water for 3 days. And if you go for more than 2 days without water, you're going to be in some serious health issues. And so one of the, it's very serious when your body gets dehydrated. You can end up in the emergency room. It affects all your organs. So I'm going to say, first of all, stock some bottled water. Even just 2 or 3 cases of bottled water would get you through a day or two. And then beyond that, get the big water cubes that are the heavier plastic. Don't use gallon jugs. I know from experience, I had some gallon jugs set back, some water, gallon jugs of water set back to use around my greenhouse. And over a period of time, I'd go pick one up and the bottom would just fly out of it. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to have an emergency and lose your water because you put it in a gallon jug. And so get some of those cubes. They've got 5 gallon, they got 7 gallon, and a lot of them are stackable. So you could, stack them in the corner of your garage or stack them in the corner of a closet or in the corner of your pantry or somewhere out of the way. And so you'll have some water on hand. Improvise if you have to. Stack a couple of them, put you a little piece of plywood on top of it, put you a tablecloth over it, and you've got a corner table in a room and nobody knows that you got water underneath that tablecloth. I mean, there's lots of ways to improvise and hide things. I'm not saying necessarily just to, to be hiding things, although that's not always a bad idea either. But then for a major disaster, like some of those people in the mountains were weeks without electricity. Okay, in that situation, unless they had an alternate method of getting the water out of their wells, then they were out of water too. And of course, even in the cities or in the small towns where they had city water, if the electricity's off, the pumps in the municipal water are not going to work either. So make sure you've got some kind of water storage. It doesn't hurt. It's not a bad idea to have a water collection system from, the water that comes off your roof during a rain or whatever. You need to go on YouTube and do some research on that, because I know that lots of people use those great big PVC, they're like a 300 gallon or something containers, and, get something like that that's been used that's a food grade or something like that, and use that as a water collection system. Now, that's not necessarily going to be drinking water, but that could give you water to flush a commode. That could give you water to wipe down, surfaces, water a garden. It could give you water for several different things. And plus, if you've got that, then you boil it, use water purification tablets. You might need to filter it. And you can also find videos on filtering water using gravel and sand and charcoal to create a filtering process. And then once you've put it through that filtering process, boil it. And then you've got drinkable water. You can use unscented Clorox to put a few drops of chlorine into that water. I know some people say they use the chlorine that you put into a swimming pool. That's a much higher amount of chlorine, so you'd have to be real careful with that unless you were really adding chlorine to a lot of water. But make sure that you've got some kind of a system so that if something like this happens, that you've got water backup. Now, I was talking about Hurricane Helene, but at my house, we drink water all the time. And my tap water here in the house has got sulfur and, stuff in it that's just not good to drink. I do filter water, and I've got a Berkey, and so I do filter water, but we also keep bottled water because it's not as convenient to get a glass of water from the Berkey if we're out in the garden or out in the yard or whatever, you know, working like that. So really do some research and find ways to have your water ready in case of an emergency. And what I was saying about us and our water situation is that if we had a situation of a bad financial situation where we couldn't afford to buy water, of course we would still filter water through the Berkey. And I do try to keep some extra filters on hand, although I think Berkey's gone out of business now. But there are some other filters on the market that I can buy for that, but I do have some extra ones on hand. And so figure that out and make sure you've got a water filtering system. Okay, so then that's category one. The next one is, of course, your food. And we've talked at great length on here, since this is a canning and cooking channel, about having a stocked pantry. And I said in the video a couple of days ago about, that I would talk to you all about the kinds of foods to stock in your pantry. And the first thing that I'm going to say to you all today is, if you don't have your pantry stocked, and I know that if you're canning, then that's going to improve your pantry situation, but that's not an immediate. That takes time. It takes months to get your pantry stocked from home canned foods. So I would suggest that every time you go to the grocery store, pick up some kind of canned meat. Canned meats and, the high calorie, high fat, those things that add calories to your daily calorie amounts. In a situation like that, you are going to need the calories because you're going to be working and using a lot more energy than you would otherwise. So pick up canned meats. Pick up plenty of canned vegetables. And whenever I tell you to get canned vegetables, get the vegetables that you and your family normally eat. And not just vegetables, but canned beans. Pick up, stockpile. It doesn't matter if it's just 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 cans of pintos or great white northerns or kidney beans, black beans. Make sure you've got a variety of beans on your shelf, and make sure you've got a variety of vegetables on your shelf. And then the other thing in a situation like this, and I'm going to say this especially if you've got children, especially small children, they're going to be irritable through this kind of a situation. Canned fruit can make all the difference in the world for a child. It can make all the difference in the world for somebody as old as me. So make sure that you get plenty of canned fruits and vegetables and beans. And it doesn't hurt to try to stockpile some cans of dehydrated and freeze-dried things, especially like y'all have seen me recently dehydrating peppers and dehydrating celery, and I dehydrate onions. And when you've got bags of beans, those kinds of things can make all the difference in the world with making different things out of those beans. And another thing is dehydrated tomato powder or freeze-dried tomato powder. You can take a pot of pinto beans and throw some tomato powder in it with some onions and peppers and stuff like that, and turn it into a pot of chili. So make sure you've got those things on hand. And then the other part of the food that you're going to need to make sure you've got are your fats. Your lard, bacon grease, tallow, olive oil, avocado oil, butter. All of those things are going to be needed. And then in addition to that, I was talking about the onions and those things like that. Dehydrated and freeze-dried carrots is another one that's real good to add to those seasonings, or those foods that you put in your pantry, and then different seasonings. And you need to look at your own spice rack and see what you use the most of, and those are the things that you're going to want to put in your pantry for long term. And and then of course the next one would be some kind of dairy, some non-fat dried milk, some cans of evaporated milk. If you can get freeze-dried butter, freeze-dried cheese, those kinds of things like that. If you're stocking, and then of course my next category will be grains, and that would include macaroni. If you're making macaroni, kids are not usually going to eat macaroni unless it's got some cheese in it. If you've got dehydrated cheese, then you can make macaroni and cheese for those kids. And then with your grains, you're also going to want to have some flour and cornmeal. And, if you've got a way to do it, get some wheat berries and some various different grains, some rice, some oats, things like that. Now, once you've got your water and your food in place, the next thing you need to look at, or at least one of the next important things you need to look at, is your security. Your home security, your personal security, your internet security. There's so much going on with cyber attacks and the phishing attacks and all that stuff with, people are constantly sending me emails with links and text messages with links. Don't open those, because they're going to take over your accounts if you do. And so make sure that you've got personal security. And with that, you might even want to take some self-defense classes. Skills can save your life at some point. And so, go and take gun carry classes. If you're going to carry weapons, then you need to have those gun carry classes. And not just that, you need to practice. And I'm talking to the choir right now, because I need to practice with mine. My son's supposed to take me, I think, next week. But anyway, make sure you do that. And then look at your home and see what your surroundings look like, and make sure that you can protect your home from all directions. And if you need to put some barriers around your home, try to do that. And part of the personal protection might include knives. It might include a baseball bat, a BB gun or a pellet gun. In some situations, you might not want to fire a regular weapon, but if you've got a pellet or a BB, they don't put out the sound that one of the regular ones would. And then security lights. And I'm going to say this, I think security lights are good in some situations, but I think there could be some situations where security lights would just draw attention to your property. So, think about that both ways. Also, in your security stuff, think about blackout curtains. There's a window shield that you can get for your windows that make them harder to break. And I have heard several people talk about sandbags to put around the house. And of course, I don't know if sandbags would have helped much in a situation like Helene, because the force of the water was so strong. But I suspect that in some areas it probably would have helped. So, you don't necessarily have to fill the sandbags, but have them on hand so that you could fill them if weather report is saying you're going to get massive downpours or hurricanes or tornadoes or whatever. And I don't think it would work much for a hurricane either. sandbags, you couldn't stack them up tall enough to stop the waves coming in. But and then, like I said, blackout curtains and ways to make your home look absolutely dark. If you've got candles or lights inside the house at night and the power's out, that light's going to be seen for miles because everything's going to be pitch black. And so make sure that you've got a way to cover your windows and to prevent any light inside from going out. So be sure and tune in the next time for the remainder of this series on things that I learned during Helene, and some of it also from just personal experience throughout my life. But anyway, until the next time, God bless you.